Why do we spend money trying to look like we already have money? Every morning, Alex got dressed without thinking much about it. His clothes were simple. They did their job. He had a steady job, a normal routine. Nothing felt wrong. One evening, he found a jacket he actually liked. It wasn't expensive, just practical, so he bought it. Looking in the mirror, he felt pretty good. Then he opened social media. Suddenly, the jacket looked different. Not because it had changed, because his mind had. The next morning, even his own closet felt disappointing. Every window seemed to remind him that someone else looked more successful. A simple watch started looking too simple. His bank account said, "Not a good idea." But his imagination kept saying otherwise. At work, he noticed watches he'd never cared about before. On the way home, every scroll gave him another reason to compare himself. The jacket he liked yesterday already felt ordinary. That night, shopping became entertainment. Every product asked the same question. Would people respect you more if you owned this? He didn't buy anything, but somehow he couldn't stop thinking about it. A few days later, the shopping mall felt different. It wasn't selling clothes. It was selling identities. Every expensive product seemed to promise the same thing. You'll look successful. Nobody at the cafe judged him. The pressure existed mostly inside his own head. Soon he spent more time comparing products than enjoying the things he already owned. Without realizing it, Alex had stopped asking, "Do I need this?" and started asking, "What will people think if I don't have it?" The next morning, Alex looked in the mirror again. The new clothes were there, but the feeling was already fading. He walked through the city, waiting for someone to notice. Nobody did. Everyone was busy living their own lives. At work, everything felt exactly the same. The clothes had changed, the day hadn't. Then another post appeared. Someone had something newer, something more expensive. And just like that, his excitement disappeared. Yesterday, this jacket felt special. Today, it was just another jacket. The search started again. Shoes, watches, jackets, one thing after another. Then reality showed up. His budget was getting smaller. His wishes were getting bigger. He looked around his apartment, his bed, his laptop, his books, his kitchen. He already owned a life he once worked for. But somehow, it didn't feel like enough anymore. Another scroll, another perfect outfit, another comparison. The cycle restarted without asking permission. That night, Alex asked himself something. Why does every new purchase stop feeling new so quickly? The next morning, he chose the expensive outfit again. Not because he liked it more, because he hoped other people would. Even at a small cafe, he found something else to compare himself to. Every photo online looked carefully designed. Perfect clothes, perfect watches, perfect lives. None of them felt accidental. Then he saw another watch. More expensive, more elegant. It looked like confidence, made of metal. He opened his budget again. He knew he couldn't really afford it. But another thought was louder. Maybe this one is different. After a long pause, he clicked. For a moment, it felt exciting. When the package arrived, he smiled. It felt like he'd finally reached something important. He stood in front of the mirror. The watch looked great. So did he, at least for a little while. He wore it to work, quietly hoping someone would notice. Nobody did. Then his phone showed him an even better watch. And suddenly, his new one didn't feel special anymore. That evening, His recent purchases sat quietly on the desk. The excitement was gone. Only the price remained. His bank account looked different now, not because his life had improved, because his money had disappeared. Looking at his monthly expenses, something finally became clear. He wasn't buying a better life. He was buying a better image. Passing the same luxury store, he looked at the watch on his own wrist. Buying one expensive thing had only taught him to want the next one. Standing in front of the glass, Alex realized something. The reflection had never changed. Only the price of the things around it had. That night, Alex placed everything he had bought on the table. The clothes, the watch, the shopping bags. For the first time, they all looked strangely quiet. He opened a drawer. Inside were things he once couldn't wait to own. Now, he barely remembered buying them. The next morning, he looked at his budget again. Every purchase had taken something. Not just money, but choices. On his way to work, another luxury advertisement caught his attention. His hand touched the watch. But this time, he wasn't feeling proud. He was wondering what it had really changed. Later that day, another expensive product appeared on his phone. His thumb stopped just before tapping it. He looked around. People were eating, talking, laughing, checking their own phones. No one was paying attention to his clothes or his watch. That evening, he opened his closet. He looked at the expensive outfit, then at the simple one. This time, he chose comfort, not approval. He opened the shopping page one more time. The same products, the same promises, the same feeling. Then, he quietly closed it and moved his savings a little closer. It wasn't a big decision, just a different one. He looked at his old clothes, then at the expensive ones. Neither of them could decide who he was. The following weekend, he walked through the same shopping district. The stores hadn't changed, the advertisements hadn't changed. Something else had. He stopped in front of a store window. His reflection stood between luxury products. It looked exactly like it always had. The expensive things had never changed the person in the glass. Instead of entering the store, he walked into a small cafe. He bought a simple coffee, and somehow it felt enough. From the window, he watched people walking outside. Some dressed simply, some dressed elegantly. From a distance, they all looked like ordinary people, living ordinary lives. Back home, he placed the watch inside a drawer, not because it was bad, not because owning it was wrong, but because he no longer needed it to prove anything. He opened a notebook. Instead of planning his next purchase, he planned his next goal. A little money went into savings. Not much, just enough to remind himself that the future was worth buying too. Then, he returned to his own project. Slow progress, small steps, nothing impressive, but this time he was building something real. The advertisements didn't disappear. The temptation didn't disappear either. For a moment, he still wanted it. But instead of shopping, he looked back at what he was creating and kept working. Days later, he walked past the same luxury store. This time, he didn't stop. When he arrived home, nothing looked richer. Nothing looked bigger, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like enough. He stood in front of the mirror, just like he had at the beginning. Same apartment, same person, maybe even the same clothes. Only one thing had changed, the way he saw himself. His phone rested face down. His notebook stayed open. The expensive things were still there. They just weren't in control anymore. Maybe the goal was never to look rich. Maybe real confidence was never something you could wear, because the people who are truly building a better life usually spend less time trying to make it look better and more time making it better.